On today's episode of Fearless with Uduak Amimo, a woman writing her own life melodies and dancing to her own beats. Thandi Dyani is many things: a leadership and inclusion consultant, facilitator, DJ, and founder several times over. Born to a South African father and Danish mother, Thandi lives and works between both countries in her primary role as the External Network Organiser at the BMW Foundation. Thandi, welcome and thank you for joining me on Fearless.
Oh, thank you, Udo. It's great to be here with you.
So, Thandi, we will start at the very beginning, which, given your age, I'm sure you know, is a very good place to start. What sort of childhood do you have as the child of a South African exile who flees apartheid for Denmark and then marries your mother, a white woman?
So I think, well, my mother and father, they actually split up when I was 2 years old. It's one of my first memories is when they did that. I think for my father, it was very hard to live in Denmark. Also with the context of being in asylum, not knowing, what happened to your family. You lived your whole kind of youth and adult life somewhere else outside of your home. I think it's hard. And I think also it's hard for a mom with kids. I'm the youngest of three to navigate. He was a musician, a double bass player. So you can actually see him in the picture. Navigating that lifestyle as well, being away a lot, and so I didn't grow up with my father kind of close. He moved to Sweden back then. There was a big kind of community of South African exiles living in Sweden at the time. Also a little bit in Denmark, but a larger community in Sweden. So my mother was my rock. And I think it's so funny because I always think about my father, how big an influence he's had on my life with his absence and his, stories and all the things I've had to learn about him growing up, as an adult. And how like less space I actually give to my mother when I talk about my life and childhood. But, sometimes it's like the people who give you strength, also the people who take a back seat somehow. They push you forward, they give you that stuff to lean into. And the people who are absent or have that kind of a little bit of chaotic way of like showing up in your life, whether it's because they passed away or whatever, that might be. I think that it takes up a lot of space and it defines how you see the world somehow. And from a very young age, I think being me, being part of my family construct or this constellation really taught me that life is super unfair. It's hard to be a person of color in a Nordic country. Yeah, life is not just, and we just have to figure it out. And yeah.
So you talk about favorite stories. So let's start with your father, because my understanding is that he fled into exile when he was 17. Was there a defining incident that sent him on his way out of South Africa? What's the story behind that? What's your favorite story of this man who was largely absent from your life?
So like I said, I had to kind of speak to different people and read different articles and whatever to figure out who he was a little bit, because when you marry someone or if you're in a relationship with someone, you're very like, that's the lens you look through and you have a lot of emotions. Anyway, he was I think he didn't live like a lot of African children. He lived with his grandmother, and I think very early on he realized that he was a musician, by birth or what, not by choice. And he was this really high tenor, and he kind of always found himself in these places of music where he could sing, and he was part of a vocal group. At some point, I think he changed, and that's my thinking, that because he was this high tenor, really high tenor, he chose the double bass, kind of to balance it out a little bit, and he taught himself how to play. He never read notes or anything. He was just like a natural talent, and he found himself being invited into a biracial band, led by a white person from Cape Town, and they were these different Black people kind of populating the different roles in the band.
And this was illegal
This was
then,
illegal.
wasn't
Yeah. So it was illegal. It wasn't something that was super popular. Of course, there's always pockets of beauty in the mess of apartheid, So there were places where you would come together and play and practice and all these things in Johannesburg, and probably also some places in Cape Town. But they were then invited to a jazz festival in France. I think it was in '64 when he was super. I'm not sure. There's also, the apartheid system also erased people's knowledge of where they were born, when they were born. So there's always been a little bit of a, how old was my dad when he, well, anyway, he was supposedly around 17, 18 when he came to Europe with this biracial band. And like, the Black Stallion book was prohibited to read in South Africa. So was people coming back if they kind of showcased the world that they, in this interracial setting. So from when they left for this jazz festival in France, they never got to return. Or some did. Some actually, I think, besides one out of this band, everyone died in exile, which is also quite telling of how it must have been, being away from everything, these young people who are kind of like teaching each other how to be adults or whatever, existing in the world. So, yeah.
And your mom then, just a bit about her story, especially because you say this person has propelled you forward. And it's almost as if, there's a sense of, and we hear about this, that when children feel safe, they end up taking that parent for granted.
Mm. So I don't think I ever took my mother for granted, but I think like I said, the void of something can kind of, I don't know, it defines sometimes who you are as well, right? So my mom, I think, was a great adventurer. She was, well, she's born in '44, so she's one of the big,
This is a big birthday coming up. She's 80 this year.
Yes, she's 80 this year, which is beautiful. And she decided that she wanted to go to England to work when she was 19 or 18, I think. And back then, it wasn't normal for an unwed young person. It was before kind of the hippies and all that stuff. So it was kind of, everything was very square pants. But we have relatives in England, and she went and she became like untrained nurse or whatever. She worked in a hospital, and she met my brother's father, who's Nigerian, actually. And she became pregnant with him. Well, long story short, she, I think, always chose her own path, and it was not easy at all. I can only imagine what it must have felt like being pregnant, coming home from working and traveling in another country in 1964, being pregnant with a mixed child and trying to, unwed and all that stuff. Anyway, my brother's father was super smart, and he was on, he was connected to some of the biggest universities, and he was sent there by the night, just this really smart person. And they tried to actually get together for all that time. But then the war started between the North and South. And yeah, so it was impossible kind of for them. And then when my brother was around 6, I think,
You're
my
talking about the war in Nigeria or the war in Europe?
no, the war in Nigeria.
Okay,
She wanted to go to him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Biafra War.
Right.
And she wanted to go to him, but everyone was like, "Don't do it. It's gonna be dangerous," and all those things. But I think she really wanted to. Anyway, circumstance, right, of life. So she had this. She was a single mother, had this child, my brother, and she was super into jazz. I think she hated all that kind of conformative music that was played back then. But Copenhagen happened to be like a jazz, like Paris, like a jazz space where everyone came through and played music. There was a lot of really cool jazz places. And one night she decided to go out. She had heard about this band that was playing a duo, which was my dad and Abdullah Ibrahim, the pianist, also South African. And she told me it was a life-changing experience. watching those two play together. And always this jazz place called Montmartre, they had like a night disco after every concert. So, but she was a mother. She was going home, but she was super young. She probably was 23, 4 at that time. And my dad had stopped him or her in the door, like, "Can you please stay? Let's have a dance." So that's kind of how they met, in a jazz club. And now I forgot what you asked me. I was just like,
No, no, it's a beautiful story. I've seen Abdullah Ibrahim play in London, and you're telling the story, and I can imagine for your mother what it felt like being
yeah,
there. And then
yeah,
the guy you've just seen on the stage is like, "Hey, what's up? Do you
yeah,
mind staying on for a drink and a dance?"
yeah.
So you've got this phenomenal legacy of travel, exploration in your blood. You have these two parents who chart their own path. Like it sounds, like kindred spirits. So navigating Denmark, because I hear what you're not saying, which is mixed children in Europe, and I can't imagine how difficult that was for your mother, being a single parent, a white woman with mixed children, and then, multiple cultural heritages. What was that like for you? How does that shape you?
Well, first of all, I think you don't know anything else as a child, right? Of course, you can see yourself in comparison to other people, other families, and it was also the 80s where everyone was poor, like it wasn't the best of times, in larger society. But we lived in a place. So my mother, she decided to move in with my grandfather when I was like 5-ish. This was after they split up, my mother and father. And they bought a house together, which was also super not normal for Danish standards, where everyone, is super individual, lives by themselves, and you plant your parents somewhere else and all these things. So I lived with my grandfather, which was also such a like secure base, her and him. And he was a teacher, he was a painter, he was like such a green thumb, and we had this huge garden, and we just had this safe space that kind of protected us also a little bit from the world. But we were also like the only mixed children in all of the municipality we lived in. So every school, everyone kind of knew who you were, also growing, like getting young and going to high school and those things. So I feel I had like a super racist teacher. It's not something I knew back then, but I can see now looking back at it, kind of analyzing, when you met the system or met these very square ways of looking at this single mother family in this very nice part of northern Copenhagen, where people have money and whatever, So I always felt very different from everyone else, but we had this sort of island of, where I felt protected, and my mother was good at protecting me. And of course, growing older and having all these experiences with racism and exclusion from in different parts of going to school or education or the job market, she always, and I think mothers do that, she was like, maybe it's not that, maybe it's something else, because it's so heartbreaking, I think, to not being able to protect your children from circumstance of, these racist systems.
What
But
sort
it
of
also,
racism, how does the racism play out for you and your brother as children?
so I think for my brother, because he's from 64, which is like, then there was really no mixed children. There was no one from the outside. Everyone who came like from Turkey, Pakistan, they came when I was growing up. So there was at least a little more, but it wasn't much, So I also have a sister, which I have almost the same age as. So I don't know. I think it came into it. It kind of showed up. For example, when I left primary school and had to go to high school, and in that context, there was always these ways of, if I did something, a flaw in a assignment or something, I always had this extra burden of being scolded. Other and the blonde rich kid who was also in my class, if they did exactly the same, there wouldn't be the same treatment. And you get this test or whatever, not a test, but like your teacher will give you a piece of paper saying you will be fit to go this way or you will not be fit to go to high school. And I was, for example, the only one in my entire class who was quote unquote not fit to go to high school. But I was like, this can't be true, you know? And I think I always knew, even though I wasn't very old, I was 15, I was started school early because I was super smart. Um, and I could read and write because I had teachers in my house, you know? But I think I always knew it wasn't me and it wasn't my capability. So I was like, screw them. I'm going to the next phase and I'm going to leave everything behind. I'm going to get new friends. I'm going to get new teachers who sees me in another light. And, but you go through all these extra hoops to get somewhere, even though you're just as deserving, just as smart, just as much grit or drive or whatever. So I think I felt that all through my education, but also when I finished university, for example, and had to get into the job market where I just sent like 150 applications without ever hearing anything from anyone, you know? Yeah. So it's always been a
So,
winding road.
so those are your earlier experiences of Denmark. At what point do you experience South Africa for the first time? Do you live there for an extended time? Apartheid ends in 1994. Do you experience apartheid at all? What is your engagement with your South African heritage?
So I think the resistance or whatever that took place in many places in Europe, there was these small pockets of collaborate, and even Scandinavian countries were actually collaborators with the ANC and the resistance quite openly. So my mother, she was always super kind of, uh, let's go to these spaces where there's some South African people and South African culture. And we were hanging out with the back then ambassador of the ANC to Denmark, and like his children, and who, by the way, changed names when apartheid ended because everyone was living in with different identities, because the system of apartheid, it came up to everywhere where people were in asylum or in political asylum, and they were killed or they were drawn back, and so
So they had to hide their identities.
yes. So suddenly when the election came or Mandela was freed, oh, actually my name is not this, it's this, and my children's names are actually it's, which was super confusing and like, okay. No, so my mother was very good at kind of putting us into these spaces. But my father passed away when I was 9, and he was on tour in Germany, actually, in Berlin. And the ANC decided, or we wanted, really, my mother and his girlfriend at the time, they really wanted him to come back home, because I think his biggest wish was to get home, and he never got to experience a free South Africa. So the ANC kind of organized a trip for us to take his body back to Eastern Cape where he was born. And this was in 86. So it was during apartheid. And actually the last years of apartheid was super hectic. And anyway, so we traveled, Eastern Europe was also an ally of the ANC. The whole communist system was part of kind of that struggle, and also helped, with the armed forces of the ANC, all that stuff. So we came through Eastern Europe or Eastern Berlin and went through checkpoints, all those things. So it's also like this, wow, it's actually crazy things that I've experienced getting from Denmark to South Africa, to experience also how the world was super divided at the time. Anyway, my first kind of encounter with the apartheid system, other than of course knowing that my father was not allowed to go home and they didn't have the same rules, whatever, was when we were boarding our flight in Frankfurt. That was Germany, of course, always on the wrong side of history. They had flights that went to South Africa. Many places didn't have this because they were, you know, boycotting any ties with the South African state. But you could fly from Germany. And I remember distinctly, my mother was white and my father's girlfriend, who was also white, a Swedish lady, and me and my siblings, and we were mixed, And a person who was sitting next to my brother had asked the stewardess or the flight attendant to be moved away from our family because he felt uncomfortable with sitting next to us, with the messiness that we were, you know? So this was my first kind of encounter with that system. But also coming down to South Africa, what we now know as these, really violent townships and stuff, Alexandra and Joburg and Soweto and all these places where all Black people, all people of color lived and where we moved to. That's also where we found our friends and our home, when we were there. And it was such a beautiful experience, but also you could kind of feel that there was something, of course, the divisions, and you had to go through these checkpoints to get to one township to the other, and people were super divided. If we were to live there, I would live somewhere, my mother would live somewhere else, and my father's family would probably live a whole different place. So everyone was divided: Indian, colored, blacks, whites, but there was this tension, and when we came to East London, where he was buried, so there was like this, all the schools were closed, for example, because that's what started also tearing the system down, was of course young people with a lot of grit, and so schools were closed. No, none of the bigger kids went to school. All the schools were used for like self-defense classes, all these kind of activities that would help protect the people in this struggle, and it was actually a very violent struggle in those between 86, 7 and until the system broke down. So that was insane. It was insane. And I remember my super unknowledgeable teacher when I came back from South Africa, losing a parent, traveling through this crazy experience. And I came back, and instead of her kind of have told my classmates, listen, whatever you say about that story, she told the class that they should be nice to me because now I was back, while I was there, standing there in class, my first day back, that they should be nice to me, because I lost my father and I had traveled to bury him and stuff. So it was just, yeah, I always felt super misplaced somehow, but always, I don't know, always knowing that it wasn't me. It was somehow not, yeah.
And that's really, I think, a gift from your mother,
Yes.
because it sounds like she worked very hard to put you in touch with your cultural heritage, but also to affirm your existence and your right to a life of dignity.
Yes.
Um, despite the context that you found yourselves in. So clearly, and you mentioned it earlier, but it's also evident that these experiences inform your work, and it seems to be social justice, inclusion, diversity, equity. That is a thread that runs through your portfolio.
Hmm.
Just briefly, tell us, give us an overview of your portfolio of professional pursuits, Thandi.
So I think when I had a long period of time where I didn't know what I wanted to do, I just knew I wanted to travel. I wanted to get the hell out of Northern Europe and find my tribe, So I spent like 8 years between I was 18 to 26, just working and traveling, working, traveling. I traveled to the Caribbean, I traveled to the States, and I was super afraid to travel to South Africa.
What kind of work?
Sorry?
What kind of work?
Mind numbing work. So I knew I didn't want to stay in that space, but I also knew I don't know if I want to. I mean, none of my parents obviously is educated from university, and this was kind of where my peers were going, So I felt kind of this internal struggle. I just knew I wanted the adventure,
What was
So
the mind-numbing work that you were doing, Thandi?
I was working for this, like a phone company. Like we had a lot of fun, obviously, but it was completely like just sitting, putting in numbers in the computer, and but also I quit all those jobs without knowing what was next because I knew that I could do more or whatever when you beat the system. like the technological system. You're too fast for it. You know, you can't stay in that place. But it gave me access to the world, which I appreciate. And it also let, I think sometimes you think your road is linear, but it never is. And in that unlinear way of your path, it's where you find your purpose as well. And visiting more places in the world, understanding my troubles, also seeing myself or my life a little bit from the outside, also led me to think, okay, I keep thinking about politics, about systems, about society. I need to know more. So I enrolled in university eventually, you know. Um, and yeah, and I started working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs during my studies here in Denmark. And I thought this was where I wanted to be. Like, I want to work in diplomacy or the UN or something like that. But when I was done with my studies and obviously had to change, you know, then your contract also ends because you're a student worker or whatever with the ministry. It was when the financial crisis hit. And there was like, I think maybe 50 to 60% of all public funded jobs, for example, in the UN or in ministries, they were just cut and people were, you know, stagnated, or I'm keeping my job. So nobody, you know, because it was a very uncertain time. So I was like, well, okay, then I need to figure out something else. And I started my own kind of social enterprise. So in the meantime, like before this, I had been a DJ for many years because, like I said, I traveled a lot in the Caribbean and I fell in love with Caribbean music like soca, reggae, dancehall, and nobody was really listening to it back then in the 90s, late 90s, and at least not in where I came from. So I took all that music home, and a friend had just asked, "Hey, do you want to come play at a party?" And then kind of that whole DJ thing started. So I used a lot of time also on that. Also, kind of, you know, promoting my taste to other people and kind of, you know, there's more to life than this, what you hear on the radio. There's so many cultures and richness. And, you know, I just felt, and I think, of course, also growing up with a musical family, it's like music has a way of explaining or giving you an understanding or an insight to cultures you don't understand. You don't even have to speak the same language to appreciate music, or creating connections across, you know, on a dance floor or in a celebration or whatever. So I just realized that music was so powerful. And this is also what my social enterprise was working
I
with.
have to ask you this question.
Yes.
What would be the theme song to your life, Thandi?
Oof, that's hard. I think I always, the theme
Okay,
song,
soundtrack, playlist.
but it's
What's
so
on the
many.
playlist? Yeah, no, what's on the playlist? Give us the top three songs
I would
that
say
are soundtrack to your.
something Earth, Wind and Fire, something something jazz, and something maybe hip hop or dancehall. Because, you
Hip hop or
know,
dancehall? How do
yeah,
you? They're not even the same. Sorry, I like my music, as you can see. So how do you bring hip hop and dancehall and say either or?
yeah, that's true. But then top three would have to be a top four. Ah,
Okay. So
yeah.
look, you're being modest, and so let me fill in the gap of the question I've asked you. This is what I know of you so far in terms of your portfolio. There's the consulting with the BMW as a foundation. You are the organizer of the external network, and you actually facilitated the session, the gathering that brought me into the RL network. You recently launched One Groove, a sort of music incubation social enterprise thing, which you will tell us about. Then you're launching a speaker agency. And then there is, what am I missing? Then you are also one of the hosts of the Nordic Denial podcast. Then there is the Soulfuls, and then there's holding spaces. And I'm sure there's a lot more that I don't know about. So just give us a headline in terms of what these things do and why you started them. Just a quick overview.
Um, I think, like I said, when you get spoon fed with your how, with unjust living, or it kind of also became my purpose, like how can I not work with these things? How can I not use all the privilege that I have to change people's minds about something? And I think I also worked a lot with startups and entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs while I was starting my enterprise in the beginning and supporting them both in here in the Nordics, but also in South Africa. But I realized at some point that humans are the ones we need to work with. Every system, every organization, everything we do has a human behind. And if we can start understanding, or if I can start understanding what makes people do what they do, and what can I tell them to see new thinking, that's, I think, is my purpose. Like I like to impose. I'm curious. I'm also curious about people I dislike. It's like why I'm curious about my own feelings, but I'm also curious about why do they do as they do, and I think that's what leads me in everything I do. I want to know what makes people do as they do and how this affects a whole system, and why, why was my father not able to live in his own country? Why is it that I always had a hard time existing in white spaces? All these different things, it comes down to human interaction and understanding humans. And yeah, I think this is my purpose. And I with my DI work, or diversity and inclusion work, I go into big companies and I speak to them, and I am such a annoying killjoy probably for some. And I see some thinking, and hopefully it can bring about some change. And I'm not talking about the big change. I'm talking about the microscopic changes that makes people think about their actions, or think about what they say, or think about, okay, maybe it is something that I need to do, because that's when the big changes, then it fosters or it enables the bigger changes. So yeah, I think that's my purpose somehow.
Okay, so that's the purpose, and it manifests itself in this vast and extensive portfolio of work that you're creating and curating. So look, Denmark and South Africa are clearly very different countries, very different cultures, and we've heard that about you. So in one country, you're navigating division, exclusion, violence, and in the other country, you're navigating exclusion again, but also this, persistence in othering you. How do these experiences, one, how do you navigate your sense of belonging? Is there an either or? Is there an integration? And then how do the different experiences, even though some of them overlap, inform your approach to your DEI work?
Mm, I think you can never have 100% belonging. I think it comes in like happiness, it comes in glimpses, and you have to appreciate it when it's there. And it comes with a friendship, like getting to know you. I feel a strong sense of belonging. And it's funny, I know that you also invited Chisholm Udese into this podcast. And we, like you said, have Nordic Denial as our podcast to women of color living in the Nordics. And I think what we have, I might experience a lot of exclusion in different spaces, and being minoritized and racialized when I'm here in Europe or whatever. But the strength is that I have community, and I think when you have that, it matters less that I get, excluded in some ways. And also the older I get, the more privileges I also get. And it's not like I didn't work for it, or it didn't get served on a silver platter, obviously. But I think what matters is my connection with you, with her, with my community. And then it actually doesn't matter too much where you are, because you can find a sense of belonging anywhere. But I would also say, growing up in Denmark, there's always been a big part missing. And I, we had this big flooding in Copenhagen, and I found my father's old travel bag in the basement. We were pulling things up, and there was just piles and piles of wet stuff all over. Well, I found his last travel bag from that when he passed away in Berlin, and in that travel bag there was a little jar of South African soil, and it made such a big impact on me that I always knew that I was connected to South Africa, and I knew that I also wanted to be there more, and all these things. But I realized that when you don't have a home or you don't have access to your home, he carried it close to his heart, and I also knew that I had this complete gap somehow in my life, not having felt South African like for real, like having a life or job or whatever it might be. um so I think it also triggered me into understanding that split I feel, that you probably also feel between your mixed heritage, that you have to pursue both. And people keep asking me, "Oh, what do you feel like the most?" Like, it doesn't matter. I just know that I have two parts, and they both need to be fed with warmth and joy from each of those spaces. So I sought out uh, being in South Africa and living in South Africa, and I bought a flat in South Africa, and it gives me some sort of grounding, that I have now this life where I can be in both worlds, because I am in both worlds, and it's not by choice; it's just my existence.
And there's a sense in which it responds to your father's dream of returning home one day. So you live in both worlds. And you talk about my own heritage, Kenyan, Nigerian, and then, like you, I've traveled all over the place, even as a child. And one of the questions I've always grappled with is, where is home?
Mm.
So, Thandi, where is home for you? Is home a fixed place? Is it a defined space? You know, what emerges for you? Um, I'm going, I'm devolving into facilitator speak. What, when you hear home?
It feels like such a simple question, but it really is quite complex somehow. Home is, of course, I know a system. Like, I grew up in Denmark, I know the system. I can recognize it. I know what to do. I know how to call this and that, the doctor, like these systems, right? But is a system home that you're good at knowing your ins and out? In some ways, yes. But I think home is also a state of mind. And this, like, I was watching this program. It's been a while since I've been in South Africa, since I came home in early March, or home to here in Denmark, where I am right now. And I saw this program, and I just felt like this instant, like, oh, I miss South Africa so much. And I don't know what it is. It's not like, of course, I know some parts of the system, but it's not. It's something else. It's recognizable. It's oh, the air, the dry air of Joburg, whatever. I don't know. Home is it's not where you lay your head, but it's where you have connection, it's where you have community, and some of the people I really love and enjoy spending time with are also in South Africa. So yeah, home is both places, but in different ways somehow.
So look, there is a sense in which, because you're talking about social change, this is your life's work, and of course you're the daughter of an exile, and it sort of makes sense that you would work towards social change. And I know that one of the latest battles you've taken on is with the Danish education system and their treatment of children with special needs. Tell us about that.
So every mother thinks that their kids are special, right? But I realized last year, or we got my son tested, and he is autistic, and it doesn't change anything about me mothering him or him being different from, he's the same child as he's always been. But suddenly I could see that there would be some challenges going the normal route through school. And the municipality here where I live in Copenhagen, they're always on the save a buck here and there streak, and they put all the special needs kids into or they plan to put everyone into normal school to create this inclusion project, which is, if you think about it, great. Let's make a school where everyone can fit in. But I think it's also a utopia. Like I said, I don't think there's 100% belonging
Actually,
anywhere.
it also speaks to the, because it's giving equality but not equity.
Yes, yes, exactly. And that's actually what I fight for in Denmark. When I speak to companies here in Denmark, we don't have a word for equity in Danish. So we always speak about equality. And equality is great. That's the main goal. But there's a real long path from where we are now to equality, and that is equitable measures. And we don't have that anywhere, I think, not for women, not for women of color, not for minoritized people, not for children with special needs. And it, of course, you are invested in this very emotionally because it's your child. But I also thought this system is so hard to fight. Imagine if I was a single mother or a single parent somehow, and I didn't have the resources or the network or the followers on LinkedIn that I do. What the hell do you do then? So I was also like, okay, I need to speak out. And I went on this news channel and I did a post. I called the mayor. I did all these different things. And actually going on which is why I felt like, oh, I just want to go on pension now because I went on vacation with the message that some of all of my complaints in the system that are meant to protect citizens, they rejected them, which is then a whole different fight than you need to take. You need to get lawyers that cost money. And what does that mean if you're not in the position that I'm in? And even for me, having a lawyer for a case that might take, I don't know, 3 years, what does that mean for your life, you know? But I think it's, yeah, I take on the fight when I can. And I have to. It's not, I can, and therefore I will, you know?
So, look, the title of the podcast is Fearless, and you're speaking, and there's a fearlessness about you, and you're like, yes, I'm squaring up for another fight, Mama Bear, my child is special, and obviously all children are special to their mothers. And what do you fear, Thandi? Is there anything that makes you afraid? Because even as a child with a racist teacher, you're like, man, this is not me, it's you. you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
I don't think I fear many things. I actually had a South African friend, my first like self-made South African friend whom I met, a filmmaker I met in Denmark. He always said, Thandi loves danger, and not like jumping out of a plane, but like just always taking the path less traveled or the one that nobody traveled, and just trusting that I know my intuition tells me what's right. And I think that's really also what's wrong a little bit in this modern society. We have forgotten what it means to trust your gut, your instincts. Your intuition is the biggest tool you have. And I really trust mine. And it led me to understand, I've always, I think, seemed weird to my circles because I would take completely different decisions than what decision you would make when you have a family, then you settle down. I went, I moved to South Africa with my little child. Like I think trusting your gut is just such a, yeah, it's the power that I have, but everyone has that power. But we're told that we shouldn't use it, but we should always. But what I fear, and I know it comes from losing a parent, is saying goodbye to people. It's the worst thing. I hate it so much because I'm afraid that if I say goodbye, there's a real possibility that we're never going to see each other again. And sometimes I fear, what if my children lost me at the same age as I lost my dad? And it's not like, you're irreplaceable but for your children, you kind of are, and sometimes I fear, what if they were to lose me? What would they do? What would my husband do? Yeah. So I think I'm afraid of losing the people I love. And I think maybe that's a fear for many people, but I really fear it. It's sometimes my husband, he's like, you're so irrational. It's not like something is going to happen if I go out the door, but things can happen. I experienced that on my body, so, but yeah, I don't fear other things outside. I only fear losing the people I love.
Are there any lessons for you from that fear?
Yeah, don't wait. Don't hold back. I tell my children I love them every day. I tell them that I'm sorry when I'm doing something wrong. I go crazy with them. We dance to really loud music. I call my mother. I see my mother. I tell my husband I love him. I try and kiss him even though I'm super annoyed at him. Like never leave the room with people you really love angry, or show them you love them. You only have this moment maybe to do it. And yeah, so I try and do that, even though it's hard sometimes because I also get super annoyed with my family, don't get me wrong.
The premise of our conversation, context is responsible, transformative, and courageous leadership. What do these things mean to you? What does it mean to be responsible, courageous, and transformative?
I think, like I said, I think I'm a very curious person, and transformation will happen regardless of you like it or not. I think people are not very happy about change. I think it's human nature. We get to know something, let's just stick with it because then I know what to do. Like I said, feeling home is also knowing a system, how you call the doctor, whatever. So when those things change, it can be hard. But I think staying curious is also a way of allowing transformation because we need to change all the time to the circumstances of life, of love, or climate change, whatever. So staying curious. Responsible is, I always, when I was younger, when people just treat people like you want to be treated. And there couldn't be anything more incorrect. What you feel or what I feel in my heart or what I do is not necessarily what other people needs in their life. So accepting people's experiences, people's way of, and this is, I'm telling this myself as we go now. It's a constant reminder to do that people don't need the same things. And if we do that, it's not very responsible, and it's not very future proofing your whatever you're doing. If it's a relationship or a team or a project you're working on, a topic, you need to be able to see things for what they are, and it's not necessarily from your lens or your view. What was the last?
Courage, courageous leadership.
Yeah, just do it. Like I think I never I only kind of was sorry that something I didn't do. You can always learn from, I mean, you can do so many wrong things, but it's about using them as a learning opportunity and taking risks, and yeah, just throw yourself out there. It's what's the worst that can happen?
Mm.
You get a no, you do something wrong, doesn't matter.
So, Thandi, your friend says you run towards danger, you will take the path least, the road less traveled. You're an activist, and there's often a lot of pushback. And we're seeing that within the DEI space, there's resistance. What's been the hardest part of the work that you do? The toughest times, the darkest periods in your efforts to make the world a better place?
I think I think the darkness and the light coexists all the time. There's not a My darkest space has nothing to do with work. My darkest space has been, something with people I love. And I don't love the people I work with. Like I don't love people I speak to in some corporate bank. They don't matter in my life. They can't make me different. I can tell them something, they can believe me, they can take it, they can leave it. And I think that's my strength as well. If I don't love you, then it doesn't matter what you do. You can't do anything to me. And I think darkness and light coexist, and we just need to recognize the light when it's there. Like you say, DI work is super hard. Sometimes you just get like I'm in 2024. Did this person really ask me this question? You're like, okay, we're not, it's insane. It can be really insane working with change and equitable measures or what people should be doing, but just I keep it also at an arm's length. Like I say, if I don't love you, you can't hurt me. It's really simple. And
So,
also never wait for, like I said, it's a coexistence it's a balance. When there's darkness, there's also light. You can't exist without darkness. And like I said, the absence of my dad or the story that I have, it also led me to all the light in my life. So yeah,
so
it's
I'm hearing you say connection and community sustain you. Love, the loved ones, that sustains you. But also, there's this approach to the tough times as, bearing gifts, even though they come with difficulty. Um, but there's a certain alchemy that goes into this kind of work. The resistance, the future proofing, the I don't love you, I don't need to love you, I would just like you to do the right thing for everybody in the world. Um, what would you say is the secret sauce to ensuring that when you speak or when you facilitate a gathering or when you do a consultancy, that the work actually sticks, that it endures beyond, the door closing when you walk out of that engagement?
so, of course, you can train many things, but I also think some things we are born with. Like some things, people often tell me that they find me so grounded. I feel like I'm a complete mess sometimes, but they find me very grounded. And I think if you trust yourself, like I said, I really trust my intuition. And let's not kid ourselves. There's so much more in this world than all these weird, complex systems that humans make for each other in democracy or in whatever. But there's also this deep connection to your energy field or your intuition, your core, your soul, whatever it is. And I think people can see that all the time in every space I'm in. I'm not different. Of course, I won't speak like this to my youngest son, maybe, but I'm never different. I'm always the same person. And I think that reassures people that when they're in doubt or when they push back, they still see that grounding, like, oh, maybe there's something to this. And and I think we can train, like I say, we can train this intuition model or this core, bringing our core out and our love also for, we tend to keep our personal selves away from workspaces but we can't separate ourselves. We need to show that whole thing and we need to show the love for humanity and I think that's what draw people to me or to the things I do or that I can convince someone to do something. Does
But
that
you've
make
just said that you don't love them. No, you've just said love for humanity, but you don't love the people you work with. You love your family and your loved ones.
Yeah, but
Help us understand the boundaries.
yeah,
I'm
I
being
think
facetious as well. I think I know what you mean, but I'd love for you to just define that for us.
so. There's people you would throw yourself out on the bus, like you would die for them. I would die for my children. I'm not gonna, that's probably the only people you would do that for. But I also have a deep sense of love and commitment to humanity. And maybe I don't love them in the same way I love my children. I don't love people like that. But there's also different types of love, I think. And if I don't show love for humanity, if I don't have love for humanity, how can I expect anyone to have love for my humanity? And I think love is not love as in, oh, I feel in love. It's also love is also accountability, showing that I was wrong. It's showing I can change. I need to change the system for you. It needs to be easier for Black women to do this. love shows up in many ways. And there's love between your closest ones, and then there's the love for humanity and accountability for humanity. And I think maybe that's what it is.
Well, it also sounds like care, because you've touched on curiosity, you've touched on love. So what does it look like, given this sort of work that you're doing, in which you're so personally invested in, and which draws on your lived experience? How do you look after yourself? How do you look after the people you're working with? Particularly when, as you said, it's 2024. I don't believe we're still talking about this, or that, you've not come across this, or you're only getting your head around this now. How does care show up?
I think care shows up in respecting people's journey, that everyone has different time frames. What I know now, I didn't know 20 years ago, and maybe I couldn't. We only know things when we know them, and that's when we can act on it. And I think when we show a little bit of respect or love, respect is also love, I guess, but it's about also respecting where people are. And yeah, I guess that's a way of embracing all these crazy people that I encounter in my life. But hmm, I guess the way, I don't know. I think I'm only learning now to take care of myself. And that's also important because we can all burn out or use too much energy outside ourselves and forget what we need to feel good and to be energized again.
Hmm. So we're coming to the end of our conversation. We could go on for hours, though, Thandi. As you know, um, we might need some, fuel for that sort of conversation. Um, but you and I are both facilitators. And so I'd like you to do some live journaling for me, with these questions. And I've been asking everyone these questions. Um, what is your deepest fear for yourself?
My deepest fear is that I burn out so much that I forget to laugh, because humor is just, I use my humor in everything. It's if I am sarcastic towards you or if I laugh with you, it's a way to energize myself, but it's also a way to energize a room or getting the message across in a light way or whatever. Humor is, it saved me a gazillion. It also got me into trouble because when you're sarcastic, it can be hard, But I guess losing my humor would be, yeah, if I don't laugh, then I know something is wrong. Hmm.
What is your deepest fear for the world?
Um, my deepest fear for the world is that we I'm so intrigued at the moment by all these complex systems that we have created to just be, like, oh, the cost of living or GDP or, this law about some little stupid thing is this thick, like it's like a massive novel. And sometimes I worry that we outsmarted ourselves. Humans are so smart that we forgot that we also need to survive. Like we are probably the only species on this planet that doesn't work towards surviving. And we think we are, but we are not. Right now we're destroying ourselves and everything around us. So I think sometimes I worry the worst thing is for humanity is that we dehumanize everything and then we just fade away, and that will be the end of us, and that's super sad. Let's at least go out with love, if we have to go out. It's not like it doesn't matter if humans are here in 1,000 years. It's not like that, but can we at least treat each other kindly, with care, just care about people.
Mm. What's the last thing, Thandi, that you did that scared you?
The last thing that scared me.
Even though, of course, you're fearless.
Every time, the last thing that really scared me was coming back from summer vacation and visiting my mother that I hadn't seen in a while. and knowing that there was probably a lot of things that I would need to take care of, but also feeling scared just entering the door. What is present now, and how angry do I need to get? Like sometimes taking on roles that are a little bit twisted compared, not twisted, but like it's you put it upside down compared to being a mother and a child, But yeah, that scared me a little bit.
So
Take
confronting the reality of having an aging parent and her
Yes,
mortality.
yes, very
Mm.
much.
What three things, Thandi, are in your fear busting and your fearless toolkit?
Talking about it.
Talking about it?
Always talking about it. I need to put it out there. When you start speaking about something, it also becomes less mystical or fearful or dark or what's hidden behind. You can never come to I think, any real good thought without bouncing it off with someone. So talking about it always helps me.
Anything else?
Humor again.
Humor?
Laughing it off. Humor is like it's the best shield or the best way to dissolve fear. It's like that Japanese movie Totoro. The girl, I don't know if you know it, but it's like this single dad and his two girls, and they're super scared because they move in a new place and they sit in the bath, all of them. That was when they could still do that in a movie. And they start laughing to just kind of boost away all the uncertainty and fear of dark corners, which is true.
Look, Thandi, it's been a real pleasure talking to you on this podcast. What was the last, I'm going to throw this as we close. What was the last gig that you DJ'd?
What was the last gig? Oh shit, I can't even remember.
Haven't done that in a
It's been
while.
a year, more than a year. Um, yeah, it doesn't happen so often anymore. But this morning, my son, he asked me to play a tune, which I loved from my mid-20s with Timbaland and Magoo, like this hip hop tune. And then it made me so happy that, okay, it's good. At least the next generation also got some vibes from me playing a lot of music at home. So
Playing a
even
lot
though
of
I'm a
music, but
DJ,
also teaching people how to DJ.
yeah, we have a DJ set up in my house. So yeah,
We'll have a party in your house, Thandi Dyani. Thank you so very much.
thank you.